Welcome to the Political Philosophy Podcast. I'm Toby Buckle. Political coalitions, particularly political coalitions that are important or actually achieve anything, are almost never composed of just one element. In a country as large and diverse as America, the coalition of different groups, ideas and interests that is the Democratic Party, or we might say the sort of social force that is the anti-Trump coalition, is comprised of a dizzying array of different types of ideologies and commitments and identity groups. And this is something I've spent a great deal of time on the podcast, trying to understand at a deeper level what makes these different groups tick, how we can think about them, what models and paradigms we can bring to understanding them, and understanding how they fit together and how the tensions and sometimes even antagonism between them can explain why American politics unfolds in the way that it does. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about the leftmost flank of the Democratic Party, of radical and socialist groups, of social justice people. I've also spent a lot of time interviewing people and talking and thinking about mainline liberalism and how that is instantiated in its institutional forms. One area I've not spent as much time on is the rightmost flank of the Democratic Party. Republican crossover voters, never Trump Republicans, people who might have put their check next to R their whole lives, but something about Trump, or many things about Trump, has changed that. I haven't focused on that as much, so recently when I was offered the opportunity to interview a very distinguished scholar who's recently written a book on just that, I thought that would make a really good addition to the analysis I've been doing of the current American election. So my guest to discuss this, anti-Trump Republicans, is Kristen Monroe. She is an American political scientist specializing in political psychology and ethics. She's the author or co-author of 17 books and is most known for her work on altruism and moral choice, which was presented in a trilogy of award-winning books in which she argued that our sense of self in relation to others sets the range of choices that we find available, not just morally but cognitively. Monroe has taught at the University of British Columbia, New York University, SUNY, and Princeton, and most of her career has been at the University of California. One quick note before we get started is I've got a really full and really interesting schedule of interviews lined up over the next few months, and I'll also do some solo episodes in there. I'm getting a few out together here because the election puts a bit of a deadline on, and I think this was recorded before the election, and so it makes sense to release it before the election. After that, I'll probably take a bit of a break for a couple of weeks, and then get back to regular episodes. But we're going to get a bit of a burst of episodes where I get all of my pre-election analysis done. Apart from that, let's get straight to it. This is Anti-Trump Republicans with Kristen Monroe. I am joined today by Professor Kristen Monroe. Professor, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So the book that we're discussing today is called Politics, Principle, and Standing Up to Donald Trump. And it's kind of a profile of an analysis of Republican politicians who've done just that. What led you to writing this book, and to what extent does it emerge from your previous work and interests?
Yeah, I had done a book just prior to this, published by the University of Chicago Press, called When Conscience Calls. The subtitle was Moral Courage in Times of Confusion and Despair. And that book was written basically out of my own need to try to figure out what in the world happened in the United States in 2016. Like many other academics who are liberal, I was gobsmacked, I guess is the word you folks use. And I had students in my house wanting to understand what happened, how could this have happened? And so I started thinking about what you actually do when situations when the bottom falls out. And that happens a lot. I mean, I do a lot of work interviewing people who lived through World War II. And a man named Albert Hirschman, who's a very well-known economist, had said that after the fall of France, it was as if the barbarians had taken over. They didn't really understand what was going on. There were a lot of suicides. People couldn't deal with it. And so I tried to think about what it is that you do when things fall apart. So that book was kind of written to try to understand what it is that causes some people to stand up and take a stand and say, this is wrong. It doesn't matter what you're going to do to me. I have to speak out. Um, and so I was working with some students. I have a summer program. I run a mentoring program every year. The students were interested and they said, well, how come so few Republicans are standing up against to Donald Trump? And I said, well, why don't we try to check that out? So we started reading about some of the people, and then we were able to get interviews with a few of the people. Not as many as we would have liked. We came very close to getting interviews with Romney and a couple other senators, Flake. And I think at that point they just were uncomfortable doing it. Now a lot of people have felt it's much more serious. And so they're coming out. There are lots of people who were in Trump's administration who've spoken up publicly against him, Bill Barr, I mean, all kinds of people. So we thought it would be interesting to look at actual political situation and see whether or not moral courage in a political arena differed from moral courage in general. And there are a couple differences that we found, mostly people who are most people who are morally courageous will accord a great deal of respect to their opposition. They treat them as people who need to be convinced rather than people who need to be fought against. And in politics, it isn't like that. Most of the Republicans view Donald Trump as just an evil person that you can't reason with. So that was the main difference that we found.
Process of writing it like? You mentioned you interviewed some of these people. Anyone surprise you? Anyone, I guess you saw in a different light afterwards?
Yeah, absolutely. We did an interview with Anthony Scaramucci. I was absolutely blown away with him. I didn't know much about him. I just knew he'd been very briefly in, and he seemed a very flamboyant character. I had no idea that he was as deep a person and has as much insight politically as he did. And it was really quite interesting to talk with him because he said he was a working class kid. His father worked, I think, in the steel industry. I'm not sure. I don't remember exactly now. He was smart. He got to go to Tufts and Harvard Law. He, worked at some big firms. He got a lot of money and had it made. And then he said he went to the first Trump rally and he realized, oh my goodness, these are the people I grew up with. And he understood what Trump would tapped into, which was a deep sense of grievance that people have for feeling that they've been left behind. And there was an anger that was out there. And so some of Trump's flamboyant and really outrageous coarsening of the political dialogue, where he does bizarre things like talks about, Arnold Palmer's genitalia, that it's part of a phenomenon. People like we're sticking it to the man. We can be outrageous, and so Trump is our person. He can do it, whereas we can't. And so Trump conceptualized himself as an outsider, even though in many ways he was not an outsider, but that appealed to a certain group of people. And I think that was I thought that was pretty insightful. Now, pretty much a lot of people have come around to realizing it. I have a lot more respect for these people after I read a lot of their writings, listened to lots and lots of tapes, interviews. Liz Cheney is not someone I would have said I had a lot to agree with, but she has a lot of integrity. A lot of these people, there were three reasons that we found that they opposed Trump. The first, it was not policy. They're pretty comfortable with a lot of his policies, but they felt that he really wasn't a conservative. The conservatives try to save what's good, and Trump has no concept of what that means at all, that he's basically out for himself, and that's all. The other, the second thing was that they felt Trump was really a threat to democracy. And the third is that there was a kind of gut revulsion at this isn't who we are. We are not people who do this kind of thing. Republicans aren't like this. And so those are the main three things that I found. And I thought there's a large overlap between my own politics and these people's politics at a basic level. They were insulted, first of all, they were taken aback. Secondly, they were insulted, really deeply offended that Trump would do things like ask Brad Raffensperger to actually change the votes. It's like, and they kept saying things like, I took an oath of office. I have to uphold that oath of office. So it was I have a lot more admiration for them than I did when I started out.
I want to come back to some of those three justifications that they gave. Before we do so, one of the questions I get asked the most, not even necessarily on the podcast, but just talking to people about these things, is why haven't more Republicans done this? Now, there's the people you discussed, but I think by any metric, we're talking a fairly small minority.
Very
and
small.
and there's many other people, the Mitch McConnells of the world, who seem uncomfortable with Trump and seem aware of what he is, but just haven't found it in themselves to break with him. I think I've been answering this question kind of wrong, but I want to put it to you. We're going to spend most of the interview talking about those who do, but what about those who don't? Why do we think there's been mostly capitulation?
Yeah. Well, that's of course the big question. And that actually, I think Scaramucci was very helpful in explaining, because I had the same thought. Mitch McConnell, we know some of the things he said in private, especially around January 6th. He's quoted as saying the Democrats are going to get rid of this bastard for us. And then all of a sudden, the impeachment comes. Nope. Not going to go along with it. They could have ended it there very easily. And McConnell was a critical player there. And his wife has actually come out and criticized Trump, but not McConnell. I think as Scaramucci said, it's a variety of things. First of all, fear. Trump is a bully, and bullies are mean, and they will go after you. In the book, we document the first time Flake met with Trump, and Flake was a senator. Trump was just coming on the scene in 2016. Flake did not like the fact that Trump had criticized John McCain, who Flake was very fond of and had a great deal of respect for. And Trump basically, when they met, said, I'm going to get you. And what he said was, I'm going to make sure you don't get reelected this fall. He didn't even know that Flake was not up for reelection that fall. But that was the first word out of his mouth, I'm going to get you politically. So I think there was fear. I think a lot of times Trump actually may have things on people. It's been suggested that he has some information on various senators I won't go into because I think it's uncorroborated, but I think that there's some idea about that. And then I think the primary system, one of the things which is on the ballot right now in a couple states is moving to what they call a jungle primary, where everybody runs in the same primary, and then the two people who get the top votes will run against each other in the Senate. And so that tends to draw people more towards the center. And the system that we currently have is a system where you can have extremists in either party can run and not that many people vote in the primaries compared to the overall election. And so that tends to work towards extremism. And Trump has been very good at getting people out to vote for extremist candidates. He has a, a following it's pretty consistent. And when he said that he could shoot somebody in the middle of Fifth Avenue and nobody would care, I think that's actually true. If you look at some of the interviews, it's a man named Jordan Klemper who does very funny interviews for John Oliver, and he's gone out to Trump rallies and he'll ask him different things, and the people, yeah, it doesn't really matter. They don't really care what Trump does. They like him. And I think so those are the three factors I can think of: fear, and that he actually has stuff on him. And then the fact that there's a big extremist group that has taken over control of the Republican Party. They've taken more and more control now. And I think that's one reason you're seeing so many more traditional Republicans finally coming out, because they realize they're losing their political party. The Republican Party is not the same party it was before.
Do you think there's anything distinctive about the Republican Party, either the type or degree, that's sort of contributed to the more widespread capitulation? I mean, to put it differently, do you think if the Democratic Party was led by someone of similar authoritarianism, that you would see the Democratic Party establishment fold in the same way?
No, I don't think you would. And I think you can look at that if you just look at the age factor. When Biden just failed miserably in the debate that they had, I guess George Clooney actually was the first person that came out publicly. It was a beautifully written editorial. I didn't, op-ed page. I don't know if he wrote it himself or got help, but it was very coherent, very logical, and very sensitive. And the Democrats, I think, even now, it annoys me as somebody who is nervous about the election outcome to see Democrats they take things seriously. If someone criticizes their candidate, they, instead of immediately being defensive, they will take it critically. So, for example, there's been no discussion, very little discussion at all among Republicans about Trump's age. And it certainly looks I talk to psychiatrists. I'm a political psychologist, but I don't know that much about psychiatry. And most of the medical doctors I talk to say it looks like he's having some serious cognitive decline. One thing that happens as you get older is your filters drop. And so, we all have stories of old Uncle Ned at a Christmas party who, comes out and talks about his bowel movements or something like that. Totally inappropriate. And Trump is doing behavior which is close to that. It's very strange. I mean, why he would go on. He goes off about Hannibal Lecter, and he has this dancing where he just plays music and dances for, 38 minutes. Or it certainly seems like there's somebody who's had cognitive decline. And the Republicans don't talk about that. Whereas the Democrats, I think, are much more willing to take things seriously and re-examine things. So I don't think you would have had anybody come on and certainly had the bullying power that Trump has had. Democrats don't like that as much. So I think that and the other thing is that the Republican Party have a long history. If you go back to, look at Newt Gingrich and the contract with America in the 90s. You can go back, farther if you want to, back to the Goldwater period, where you began to have more extreme groups within the Republican Party. So this has been a movement since the 60s, I think, that you've had it within the Republican Party, where there's battles between what I think of as more traditional Republicans, the kind of, we used to call them Rockefeller Republicans, people who were for business, they were at certain foreign policy positions that they wanted, and then traditional, then the more conservative Republicans, a heavy religious group, Jerry Falwell, that type, Billy Graham bringing in religion into politics, and really much more concerned with social issues. So the traditional Republicans, I think Liz Cheney is an interesting example there. She initially, when her sister came out as being gay, she was not very sympathetic to it. And then she did change her mind, and I don't think that traditional Republicans are homophobic at all, but I think a lot of the Christian groups tend towards that. It's like, God says homosexuality is bad, and so we have to have, you see these odd behavior on J.D. Vance now, who's married to a woman who went to Yale Law School and is an immigrant, but he's coming out with this idea of women should be raising children, they should be mothers, you should be having a lot of children. That intrusion into social life and private life is something that traditional Republicans did not do. And this is the more extreme Christian right evangelical movement, which I think has been not as prominent in the Democratic Party at all.
I mean, I was going to ask how far, because there is definitely a debate in American politics observers between how far we see Trump and MAGA as contiguous with or distinct from prior iterations of conservatism. I think many of the people we talk about, anti-Trump Republicans, often present him as wholly aberrant, like a total break. But as you said, there are clear antecedents in, I would say, Rush Limbaugh as well, people like that.
Yeah.
People. Yeah, where do you have like do you have like a sort of way of framing your because the way I think about it is there are definitely clear antecedents of the MAGA movement, but we are also at a high watermark. I land somewhere between those poles. I don't know about you.
I think there is a difference between the MAGA movement and the movement that we saw with Pat Buchanan or Rush Limbaugh or any one of these, Newt Gingrich, any of these very conservative people. And the best explanation I have is comes from social identity theory, which is, you probably know, it's a man named Henri Tajfel was a Polish Jew who was studying engineering in France when World War II broke out. He was taken prisoner. He worked in the French army. He was taken prisoner. After the war, he went back, and everybody in his family, all his friends were dead, and he couldn't figure out why. And so he did a series of experiments, and he roots it in identity and says, we all have a need to feel good about ourselves. How do we do that? We define who we are in contradistinction to someone else. So I'm not you. You're dual national. We have some things in common, but you can differentiate. And people tend to do it more with, well, I'm not like my mother or father, or I am like my father. I'm not like my mother. I'm like my great Aunt Joan, that kind of thing. And what happens is that pretty soon, different from tends to become better than. And so people have a need to feel, in terms of group identity, that their group is different and better than another group. And so Tajfel has done a whole series of experiments across the world since the 1970s, where he goes around and sets people in groups, and they're arbitrary. So it's you're an A, you're a B, you're a C. Then he asks people in group A, you have option number 1 and option number 2. And option number 1 is that everybody in group A will get $5, everybody in group B will get $10, everybody in group C gets $15. Option number 2 is everybody in group 1 loses $5. Everybody in group B loses $10. Everybody in group C loses $15. And as you would expect, most people in group A will take option number 1 because everybody gets something. But consistently, about 33% of the population choose option number 2 because nobody's doing great, but they're doing better than other people, that their ego structure is such that they need to feel better than other people. And if you look at Trump's support, the solid support is right around 38%, which is pretty close to the third that Tajfel found. And so I think one of the things that's gone on with the MAGA movement that was not there in other conservative antecedents is the need to feel better than other people. They feel so bad about themselves that they've been so put down that they're angry, and they don't really care if they bring down the whole house, because at least when everything's over, they're going to be better off than other people. And so this is what I think explains to me this sort of hate that you have towards immigrants, where you say horrible things. You have It's a very odd phenomenon, but that was something that Tajfel found, and he found, and I want to be really careful here. I don't want to say that Trump is like Hitler, because I think the comparisons there are overblown. But he certainly is an autocratic personality. He wants to be in charge, and he wants to be better than other people. We know that everybody talks about Trump as being a malignant narcissist. That's the phrase that is often bandied about. But I think he's also a sociopath and a sadistic. He doesn't have any empathy for anybody else, as far as most people can discern. And I think that's the kind of person that needs to feel that they're better than other people. He's constantly going on about, I'm better looking than Kamala Harris. I'm better, I'm a better golfer than Arnold Palmer. I'm a better whatever it is. He's better. My crowds are bigger. He has to be the best. So he's always comparing himself to other people, and he has to be better than other people. And so this is a kind of personality structure that doesn't really care if everybody goes down in flames, as long as his flames are bigger than other people, he's happier. So that, I think, is a difference in the MAGA movement than I don't think you saw before, that this kind of extreme need to feel that they're better than other people, that they've been put down and have been abused, and therefore they are owed something, and they're going to get theirs back. And that's gives a kind of vengeance mentality, which I think you see in Trump.
Yeah, I mean, okay, I'm going to take up a couple of those points. On the Trump's personality, I mean, I agree, I'm not competent to make a diagnosis, but I think there is something clearly abnormal about him psychologically, and that's, I think, even through political partisanship, I can be objective enough to say that. I'd maybe push back a little on this idea that what's important to some people is that there are people below you, essentially. I think, whereas a socialist might say what matters is there are people who are equal to you, a liberal might say that what matters is there's not someone above you, or at least not someone above you in a dominating position. What does seem to really matter to a lot of people is not that they're equal, or even that there's not someone above them, but that there are people below them. And that does have quite long antecedents in American history. So I may be quoting here, but I believe it's Calhoun, before the American Civil War, says, you just don't get it, you Northern liberals. It's not about, do your factories make people better off? We can give the white man something you never can. He will always be above the black man. Even the lowest white man will always have someone below him. And you capitalist liberals, you can't match that offer. And there are some people for whom that offer is deeply appealing. And I think that's a note in American life that's never quite gone away, and has perhaps been recessive through the past couple of generations. But what we're seeing here in Trump isn't anything new, I think.
I think your reference to Calhoun is an interesting one, because if you look at the Civil War and the aftermath of the Civil War, there was a natural alliance between the poor white farmer and the blacks who were now free. And they should have joined together and benefited and taken power away from the oligarchs. And instead, what the oligarchs did was very cleverly played them off against each other. You may be poor, but at least you're not black. And so that was how they did. And they kept the blacks down for still centuries. I mean, they're still the black population in this country is still not treated as well as the white population is, in all kinds of fields. But that was what they did. And I think, yes, that's exactly the phenomenon that you're describing. And you're right, there are antecedents of it, and it's ugly. You see lots of it all over the world. It's not just in the United States, where you find people saying, well, you may be such and such, but at least you're not an X or a Y. And you see it, in England in different places. You see it in Europe, a lot of places now in Europe with the immigrants. And so it's a need to feel better than other people, that there's someone below you.
Yeah, it's also a conception of freedom. I had a book out on freedom a while ago. Freedom isn't always positive. There are dark sides to freedom, and um, one thing people often value in freedom isn't just controlling resources or whatever; it's controlling people, and it is an ideal of freedom that goes, I guess, all the way back to the Athenian or Roman slaveholder. Freedom in not just having power, but having power over others. The reason I bring that up, though, and to tie it back to anti-Trump Republicans, is I feel conflated about these people a lot of the time because it's not that I don't appreciate Cheney speaking up, and I'd rather have Mitt Romney than whoever else might be realistically elected in Utah, but I've not really seen, assuming there is at least some contiguity between Trump and MAGA and prior generations of conservatism, as I think there is, I've not really seen any taking responsibility for their part in that, or much less a repentance or reparation for it. I mean, you said you don't think the traditionalist Republicans are homophobic, and George Bush, my understanding was, personally didn't care about it at all, but still ran on it when he ran for office. And I don't think either McCain or Romney ever repudiated that. Romney indeed sought Trump's endorsement aggressively when he ran. And what I see from them is a sort of washing the hands of it. Okay, this has gone too far and I'm done. I don't see I at the very least accepted support from this, if not positively enabled it. And I now have some response. I don't want to be contaminated with it. I don't see I enabled this, I helped breed this monster, and now I have a responsibility to stop it.
Yeah. Well, I think Romney's an interesting person. He's flip-flopped a lot in terms of how he deals with Trump. When he was running, he was happy to have his endorsement. After Trump got elected, Trump had Romney come to his Trump Tower, and Romney thought he was going to be offered Secretary of State position, apparently. And he went, and Trump did it to humiliate Romney.
Yes.
He wanted to go. And so that's why I said Trump has sadistic elements to his personality. And I think Romney, Romney's not running again. He announced he's not going to run again. He probably would not get reelected. Flake was much more courageous in standing up to Trump. And Flake is very deeply conservative. I mean, he's I don't know what his record was. It was well in the 90s when the conservative groups rating him. And he just felt that Trump was not a true conservative, that he was actually hurting the conservative cause. But his career basically ended because of Trump. He's now ambassador appointed by Biden. But these people's careers have ended. McCain, and it's interesting, in McCain's last book, which was written when he knew he was dying, it's a beautiful final statement of what he wants for the country. And these people feel a very deep-seated commitment to law and order, and the idea that Trump is violating that is just, it's a push too far for them. But I think it's difficult to give up everything. Politics is it's their whole lives in many cases. In addition to that, these people have had a lot of death threats. As Scaramucci said, he spends about 18, I forgot the dollar figure. He spends a lot every month on security because they've come after, you get phone calls. Trump has done this with poll workers. They give out the names and addresses of these people, and the MAGA people go by their houses. They, Raffensperger, Rusty, I'm going blank on his name, the guy from Arizona who was Speaker of the House. Rusty, I've gone blank on his name.
I know who you mean, but I'm blanking too.
And he had people there. I've seen film clips of people outside his house, just threatening him, threatening his children. That's hard to do. And at a certain point, I think people feel, let somebody else deal with it. I just want to live a nice life. And that's one thing. It's interesting to me. I'm talking with people now. I've come up with my own psychological diagnosis, which is called APD, which is anticipatory pre-election depression. People, a lot of Democrats are sort of like, oh my God, what are we going to do? And people like Barbara Streisand says she's moving to England. Different people have talked about moving from the country. In 2016, I think the Canadian immigration website crashed because there were so many Americans that wrote that evening and asked about immigrating. And I think Albert Hirschman did a book called Exit, Voice, and Loyalty. How do you respond when something like this happens? Do you fight it? Do you leave and have a good life someplace else? Or do you go along with it? And it's a difficult question. It's a very tough thing.
I don't see much from the Republican side, though, in terms of fighting it. I see the leave, I see the wash your hands of it, and I see the go along with it. I guess, you could look at it from a moral point of view of to what extent do you have complicity in this thing coming about? I also sometimes get a bit frustrated with Republican defectors from a practical point of view. Listen, standing up to a very vocal authoritarian movement carries costs. Not disputing that, but it almost seems like once you've incurred those costs, you might as well go all the way. In for a penny, in for a pound.
Right.
And I think what I see from a lot of Republicans has changed a little bit this cycle, but a lot of the time, all these people who are like, Trump's a fascist, and that's why I'll be writing in Ronald Reagan. Right. And I'm just like, could you please just vote Democrat and encourage everyone you have standing with to vote Democrat? Because that's the thing that will make a difference,
Right. Romney said he wrote in his wife's name for president in 2020. That's not. And that's
thank you, Romney. Could you maybe do something a little more efficacious?
Yes, that's right. Well, I think, yes, I agree with you there. On the other hand, I think there have been an increasing number of Republicans who have come out publicly. Bill Barr, Betsy DeVos. There was a huge I think there were like 42 very prominent people who have comments about Trump and how bad he is. So I think there are more Republicans. I think what's going on, the polls were totally off in 2016 because they missed the extent to which people, I think there were two things factors that people were a little embarrassed to say they were going to vote for Trump because he was so outrageous. And one of the things Trump has done is he's shifted the parameters of political discourse. There's been a coarsening of our discourse where you never heard people say the things that Trump said before, and now it's being accepted as normal. But I think in 2016, the polls missed it because of misogyny and because people were embarrassed to vote for Trump. I think what's going on now that the polls are missing, they've factored in the extent to which people may want to, or they've tried to factor in the extent to which people may not want to have a woman, and they're embarrassed to say that. But I think the other thing they're not factoring in is the extent to which Republicans are embarrassed and afraid that they're going to be criticized for their friends for voting for Trump. And I don't think that's been taken into consideration in the polls. I think that's what's going on. I saw a sign the other day that said, I'm a Republican. I'm not stupid, but I'm not stupid. And I think that's people are coming out and saying it a little more now. But I still think there are people that are embarrassed to say that. And I think that's one of the factors that is a big unknown for me, how many people actually are going to go into the voting booth and think, I can't vote for this buffoon. He's just beyond the pale.
I mean, what we have seen, to just stay with anti-Trump Republicans, is we have seen at least a few of them doing this cycle what I really wished they'd have done. I mean, most prominently the Cheney's, not just saying Trump bad, but saying Trump is bad. I am going to vote for Kamala Harris, and I'm going to go on the campaign trail with
Adam Kinzinger.
Yeah, no. There's been a few. I guess my thought is I really wish we could have more of that, and I wish we could have had it in 2016. If in 2016 we could have had Romney and McCain, the past two nominees of the party, not just say, "Oh, I'm writing in my wife," but say, "I am voting for Hillary Clinton." And you should too.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting.
I don't know if it would have moved that many people, if I'm being honest, but it might have moved enough.
Well, it was interesting because I think in the book at the beginning of one of the chapters, I have quotes from about 8 prominent Republicans, including Lindsey Graham, for example. And he says, "You want to know how to make America great again? Tell Donald Trump to go to hell." And very anti-Trump statements. Initially, Ted Cruz, all these people came out and said, he's crazy. He's absolutely nuts. He's, beyond the pale. So they said that initially. And then I think something changed. And I think what changed was the fact that there were so many extremists in their own party that they knew were going to vote him out of office, that they were going to lose. I mean, you look at someone like Richard Lugar, who had been elected, I think 85% of the people in Indiana voted for him. It's phenomenal. He just lost in the next primary, because the people who turned out in the primaries were so extreme. And the way the primary system is set up, you have to get it. And so that both moved mainstream Republicans to the right, but it also brought in a lot of people that were just, I mean, Herschel Walker. Why in the world would someone run Herschel Walker? I mean, it's bizarre. And the irony is that, the Republicans should have control of the Senate right now. If they would not have run Herschel Walker, if they wouldn't have run Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania, if they'd had someone who was mainstream Republican, those were very tight rates in Georgia and in Pennsylvania.
Oh,
And
completely winnable. And a normal Republican would have won in 2016,
yes, exactly.
2020.
Yeah. And I think if the Republicans had run a normal Republican now, we would not be talking about a close race.
No,
But
no.
yeah,
Not even, you could run someone very right wing, even. I
yeah,
mean, who was the
Cheney.
Haley would absolutely, I think, be 7 or 8 points ahead right now. I
I
don't
think
think it would
so.
be a close
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, absolutely. And she was very brave. She went out there. Even after she quit running, she got about 10% of the vote in, some of the states where she was still on the ballot. So there have been people, but it's just, I think it's partly been the way the primary systems are voted. In California, which is where I vote, we now have the kind of open primary. So it was looking for a while as if the Senate seat would be a toss-up between Katie Porter and Adam Schiff. And I think Schiff probably wanted not to have to run against Porter, and he kind of, anyway, the Republican just barely squeaked ahead. But you can have states. I think there was one year when the top 2 people in the Senate race it was Kamala Harris and Loretta Sanchez, who were the top 2 who ran in California. So that shifts things a great deal for states. The other thing that I think people in other countries have a hard time understanding is the Electoral College, which is totally antiquated and it should be done away with. And there is a movement, I think, once they get a certain number of states, then they will flip it over. But that really should change. That gives a tremendous power. I think the vote that somebody in Wyoming has is like 850,000 to, 1 for a California voter. I mean, the vote's it's totally disproportionate. And
And the Senate even more so.
the Senate is also the same way. That's, Californians get, 1 senator for, I don't know how many people compared to Wyoming, which gets 2 senators for far fewer. And I don't think they're going to change the Senate, but I think there is a move to change the Electoral College. The difference between popular vote is about 10 million. It's a lot of people. And yet you can have someone win. Trump in 2016 and George Bush in 2000 really didn't win as many votes, but they got the Electoral College vote. And so that's something I think should probably change. I don't know if it will, but
I very much doubt it.
yeah.
I mean, I agree about the sort of effects of political structures. I'm an institutionalist, and I believe, yeah, the primary system certainly. Also, yes, the Electoral College, the Senate,
Mhm.
create a sort of buffer for Republicans,
Mhm.
which is a sort of quiet disincentive away
Yeah,
from
yeah,
reforming the party.
right,
Let me add one more thing, because you've just done a book on anti-Trump Republicans,
right.
which is, I think, the way we assign moral responsibility for keeping the country democratic and prosperous and safe is
Right.
very uneven. between the two parties right now. It's very much assumed that it's liberals' responsibility to check the rise of a populist far right. We've had, I don't know how many think pieces, I don't know how many books or conversations, which essentially boil down to, if liberals really want to reach Trump voters, they need to do X. And X varies depending on the predilections of the writer. But the default assumption is that something is going wrong with the country and liberals need to do something about it now. I agree, liberals should care about the future of their country, but there always seems to be an assumption that it's somehow not. You never get the same think pieces about, here's what conservatives need to do to chemo the cancer in their own party. Which seems to me a bit of an inversion. It's not that liberals shouldn't have responsibility, but this is a faction in American life that has grown up within conservatism, within the Republican Party, and yet we never talk about Republican office holders as just having responsibility to their constituents or to their country, or at the very least at a very different level. It's always assumed to be liberalism's failings that led to this.
I don't think that's correct. I don't think that's accurate. I understand your general point, but I think if you look at people like Brad Raffensperger, and then the other, again, there's another man in Georgia who was, I think, wasn't Secretary of State, but he was involved in elections, and he just had it. And he went out and had a press conference and just said, this is not what we're doing. These people were offended, deeply offended, that they would have someone like Rudy Giuliani who would come in and would, Rusty, again, I'm going blank on his name, in Arizona, has this long story that he tells about them calling him up. Trump was on the phone, Giuliani's on the phone, and he says, there was massive vote fraud. And he says, fine, just come and give me the evidence. And so Giuliani and a couple lawyers come out and they meet with him and they say there's massive. And he says, where's the proof? And they said, oh, and Giuliani turns to the woman lawyer who's now in jail and said, you have the evidence? She said, oh, yeah, I have it here. And she fumbles around in her briefcase and says, oh, I must have left it at the hotel. At which point he says, give me a break. How stupid do you think I am? These people felt a deep commitment to their oath of office. And I think Republicans, conservative Republicans in particular, they have a great respect for the rule of law. And they feel that that's what they have to respect.
You might be misunderstanding me. Obviously there are individual Republicans. Brad Raffensperger, I think, is a good example, who clearly felt that they had a responsibility in that situation to behave correctly. And then there's many others, the Mitch McConnells of the world, who don't. I'm not saying that so much. I'm saying the way we talk, and we, I mean, I guess, the media, the electorate, commentators like me, the way we talk can often assume that it's liberals and the institutional Democratic Party. It's their responsibility to save the Republican Party from itself, and not the Republican Party's responsibility to do so. I'm not sure if you see that discursive trend at all.
I'm not sure. I think that's an interesting idea, that people think that liberals have a responsibility to move towards progress where they don't feel Republicans do. I think maybe Republicans feel more, since they're more conservative, they feel more the idea of conserving what is good about the past, which would probably give them a higher respect for law, oaths of office, and progressives may want to go out and change things more. So I think that probably makes sense. I think I would probably agree with that the liberals, progressives, tend to want to think more outside the box. Let's try new things, whereas conservatives want to conserve what is good about the past, and that gives them a very hefty respect for law and order, which I do think you saw with some of the people like Brad Raffensperger camp, the governor of Georgia, people who were under a lot of pressure by Trump and his cronies to to really go ahead and certify. I mean, even Mike Pence is an interesting person because Mike Pence is someone who is an evangelical Christian. He should share some of those views, and yet when it came right down to it, he was not going to refuse to decertify the election, which I think would have been a real mess if that had happened. And I wonder what would have happened had Trump gone to the Hill that day. Again, you had the FBI people who kept him from going on January 6th. He wanted to go with the crowd, and they wouldn't take him. They said it's not safe. So I think that you may be right in that liberals tend to be moving towards a different goal, and conservatives tend to want to conserve what is good, and that gives a very high respect for law and order.
Okay.
I probably agree with.
One thing we've noted throughout the conversation is that the level of Republican opposition has increased. In 2016, it was a sort of, well,
Yeah.
I'll vote for my wife, but the public speaking out is greater, and you are now seeing Republicans say not just I won't vote for Trump, but I will vote for Harris.
Right.
Do you think that will make any difference?
I think it will make a difference, but I don't know the extent to which my hope is getting there or not. I think the traditional Republicans are going to, I think they're going to be the ones that decide this election. It's probably about 3% of the population who are lean towards Republicanism, not sure how they're going to vote yet, and I think that's a big unknown factor. It's, I think there's a tendency. I mean, I was raised in a Democratic family. I'm going to vote for, and my hand shakes and I go back over to the, Democratic thing. I think there's a lot of that. It's like, it's like getting a divorce. How can I pull apart something that's been so much a part of my life? And I think that's very difficult for people to do. I think the unknown factor is how many people are going to get in the voting booth and say, I just can't vote for Trump. I'm going to vote for her. I think there's going to be more that do things like, you said, I had a friend who said she's voting for Nikki Haley. She's writing in Haley. And, she's in Massachusetts, so I didn't bother to argue with her because I figured because of the Electoral College, her vote isn't going to make a difference anyway. But those are people that I think could determine the election. If there are three factors. One might be I'm a traditional Republican. I can't break from my party. I'm going to close my nose and hold my nose and vote for him anyway, even though I don't. And this is what you hear people say. I don't like Trump, but I like his policies. And I have an op-ed that's circulating that says if you really care about business and the economy, you should vote for Harris, because Trump's tariff policy is going to be a disaster. It's going to hurt all kinds of people. And it's going to have massive deficits. The tax policy that he has is going to help the rich. It's going to help Elon Musk. It's not going to help people like me, or certainly working class people. So I think that's going to be the critical factor, who the traditional Republicans go for. If they are traditional and can't vote for somebody, they're going to vote for Trump. Then I think he's probably going to win the election. If they decide, well, I'm embarrassed to tell my friends and neighbors, but it's private and I just can't stomach this man. This is not who we are. Republicans don't separate children from their parents and put the children in cages just because they're immigrant kids. They don't. I mean, this statement about not going to pay for the funeral of a blanking Mexican. I mean, that's horrible. And that's another question. I don't understand why Hispanics are going so much for Trump, because he's denigrated them so badly at different times, and yet they seem to be strong support for him among the Hispanics.
From experience, I don't want to call anyone from my personal life out by name, but I know people and I've talked to people who are Hispanic Trump voters.
Right.
In my experience, there's a very clear sense that he's not talking about me when he talks like that. Like he's talking about the people. I came here legally. I've lived here my whole life. I'm a citizen. He's talking about the ones who did it wrong. And of course, people have many overlapping identities. It's not that people aren't just Hispanics who just vote with that identity. I think, for a lot of people, you could talk about all sorts of different demographics. What Trump really taps into is male frustration with
Right.
I think women in the workplace and
Right.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think a lot
And,
of men feel like, I don't, but I think a lot of
right.
men do feel like
Yeah.
feminism has gone too far, and they're the
Yeah.
ones who are
Yeah.
on the other side of the stick now. And they may be
Yeah.
Hispanic or black or whatever, or have an identity that would make you think they wouldn't support Trump,
Right.
but they like the machismo guy and they kind of don't want to vote for a woman. I think there is that side of it too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think you tapped into something important there where you have kind of feeling that a lot of people have where it's not my group, it's not
Yeah,
me, it's other people that are there. And I think that one of the things that's been interesting is to look at men and the whole kind of feeling that they have about things. And we saw this with Bill Clinton when the whole thing with Monica Lewinsky came up. And a lot of men, his attitude was, hey, good for him. He can get it off in the Oval Office. That's a real man. They kind of like that idea. And I think that one of the things Scaramucci alerted me to is, which I think a lot of people feel, that this kind of political correctness has gone too far. So, for example, you're not supposed to say Merry Christmas. You're supposed to say Happy Holidays, or, you
although
know,
Republicans have been banging on about that one since the
yeah.
Reagan
And
presidency. But
we understand that. And, the stuff in campuses that you find now, that they are what's called DEI, diversity, exclusion, excellence and inclusion. And there's a lot of feeling that people have that, I would have gotten the job, but a woman, they had to have a woman who was less qualified, or they had to have a black or a Hispanic or some minority group. And so I think a lot of the things that are symbolic stuff that's gone on where I was doing an interview about some work I'd done on gender equality. And I referred to, I go back to the town where I grew up, and I referred to the girls that I would see. And the woman who was interviewing me said, they're women, they're not girls. And I said, yes, but I've known them since I was 12 years old. And the thing that's important is that they remember me when I was a girl. They don't look at and see some old lady. They see this young girl. And people don't want to be called out for, why did you say, you know, I mean, I find it very awkward, for example, to say uh, Toby Buckle, they. We have to
yeah,
have to use the they thing, and people feel it's gone too far. I mean, the whole kind of transgender thing, for example. Trump has made a big deal about how your children are going to go off to school and they're going to come home. They had a sex change operation in the school, which is ridiculous. But I think what it is pegging into is a lot of people who feel, well, how come men are now transitioning and being women and being allowed to participate in women's sports. So there's a lot of political correctness stuff that is going on that I think people, what Scaramucci said, the more you dislike that, the more you like the orange man. And I think he's really picked up on that. And I think that is probably a legitimate complaint, that I think the Democratic Party has gone too far in terms of hyphenates. It's hyphenated American, Asian Americans, African Americans, whatever the type of minority is. And I think a lot of people feel, wait a minute, what about me? I've been here, I work hard. And I think this relates to what you're talking about with men. For about 10 years now, the college rates have been going down for men and going up for women. Women tend to be a little more disciplined at that age. They want to get in, they want to get the good grades, and so they're good little girls and they go to school. And a lot of these guys now are realizing, wait a minute, I'm just as good as these women are, but I'm not getting to be, getting the prizes. I'm not getting going on. And so I think there's a resentment that's setting in because of that. And
one
some of it I think is
thing
legitimate.
one thing I've noticed, if I think about the right-leaning or Republican or people who have good things to say about Trump, who are
Mhm,
men but also hold another identity that would make you think they might not be. So they're
mhm,
Hispanic or black or working class or
mhm.
so on. One thing I've noticed that's generally true is they didn't go to college and they have sisters who did. That tends to be a fairly,
Right.
and you
Yeah.
could pretty easily tell a story about, I wouldn't say it's male disadvantage, but there's an expectation that as the man, I should be the most successful one. And within your family, your friendship group, or peer group at school, you're
Right.
actually not. And I think people have a really hard time processing that.
Well, I
And
think
that feeds into a lot of
that's
this.
part of the resentment. I think Scaramucci made the point that he said, my dad made a good living. You know, $65,000 was a good money for someone who was working a steel plant, for example. And this is, I think, one of the reasons you find a lot of women who are married to men who are maybe what we would call working class or blue collar workers, because they feel that their husbands are not being valued. It used to be if you worked on a Ford assembly plant for car, you got a pretty good wage, and it isn't as good now as it used to be. And I think that there's a lot of resentment because of that. So I think you're right. That's one of the things he's picking up. The gender gap is probably going to be about 12 to 17% in terms
Yes.
of how people vote. It's huge. And it's not just because she's a woman. I think and this is one of the things I
I
think
think it's more
Biden,
about Trump than about her,
I think
honestly.
I think that's right. She has not played that up. She's been very clever and very smart in terms of, it's not about me. I mean, here she's this classic, she's part black, or she's discovered she's black now, as Trump says. And she doesn't talk about that. She doesn't talk about being a first woman either. It's like, what can I do for you? And I think that's very smart. It's about the voters. It's not about, her and being I think she's much more likable, I think, than Hillary was.
I wanted to make one point about the social justice thing, in that I think the story's a little bit more complicated than kind of just a backlash. I do think certainly the right hates social justice talk. I think
Yeah.
that's clear enough. What I would say though is we're kind of that phase in. I'm quite in touch with this side of the left. I'd say that's kind of past now. I think we had a period from, say, 2014 to about 2020 where the types of what I would say like intersectional, that whole language game,
Yeah.
was really very prominent and
Yeah.
creating quite a lot of traction. And
Yeah.
it's really just diminished over the last 4 or 5 years. I think often what conservatives are reacting to now is kind of social justice people at their worst, clipped and highlighted and sort of packaged for them by conservative media. So
Right.
what they're reacting to is, I think, no longer even really the far left anymore. I think
Right.
that they have been sufficiently cautioned by all sorts of different pushback against that
Yeah.
type of
I think that's
language,
right. Yeah.
that, I mean, even the difference between how Democratic candidates talk now versus in the 2020 primary is, no one would say Latinx anymore,
No. No, that's
And but
true.
it doesn't really matter because there's this whole conservative online ecosystem that's kind of built around, and his whole funding comes from getting people mad about social justice people.
Right.
And the
Right.
fact that the social justice left has in many ways moderated, certainly rhetorically moderated, um, doesn't matter anymore because they just run the same clips from 5 years ago and share them with all their followers and be like, go get mad about this. And they do,
Right.
or just
Yeah.
make stuff up. And it doesn't even really matter anymore. They're not, the two sides aren't talking to each other. They're
They're
talking
not
to
talking to each other.
themselves about
Yeah.
parodies of each other.
Yeah, and they're listening to different newscasts entirely.
Yeah.
And I have this little town I grew up in. I have a couple friends who are very strong Trump supporters. And one of them told me on this abortion thing that in Illinois, which is where the town is I grew up in, that the law was that if after a baby's born, if they don't want it, they can smother the baby, that's part of the law. It's legal. I said, Nancy, how can that possibly be? And, she was convinced, and I looked it up, and it wasn't there at all. But she had listened to people on Fox News and extreme, right-wing people. And so you hear very different things. The deep state, there's a lot of paranoia out there. And so I think, yes, you're right. We're listening. It used to be that we all listened to Walter Cronkite and everybody believed him and trusted him. And now I don't think there's any news person that people on all sides would say, oh, yes, I respect and trust that person. So that's again, and I think that's one of the dangerous things about Trump, that he has created and increased the kind of paranoia that these people feel, the sense that they're under siege, that they need to, work very hard to get their country back. Otherwise, it's going to be taken over by foreigners. One of the things that was interesting to me, I've been doing some interviews with immigrants. Some of the students I work with, a lot of them are immigrants' families. And I said, well, Trump has this idea of immigrants, and look at your own family. I mean, they're not like this. But all the immigrants that we talked with, they all say things like they like Trump's immigration policy, which I don't even know what it is. I don't think they do either. But the idea is that I came legally, other people should come legally. So that's one thing you mentioned earlier that I think is absolutely right, that there's a feeling that people are getting away with it. Some people are getting away with things, and I had to play the game fairly, and it's not right that they're getting in. So that means that they don't like things like amnesty. They don't like policy for the DACA students. And, I think that's, I can understand that. I would, as a political scientist, when I have these friends who are Trump supporters, I'll instead of getting mad and throwing up my hands in the air and fighting with them, I said, explain to me what it is that you like. And the first thing was abortion. Now, this was 2016. Roe was still in existence. And I thought, I can understand that. I don't happen to agree with it. But if you really genuinely believe that it is life from the moment of conception, then it is murder to have an abortion. And so their position was not, I was able to understand their perspective. And then the same thing with immigration. They felt immigration was a mess. And I thought, no one's got a good immigration policy. So I think one of the things that's very important, and this is something that I did myself. When Trump came on the scene, I thought he was such a buffoon that people like me just wouldn't even bother to deal with him. And I did an interview with a woman. I'm working on a book right now on emigres from the Third Reich and why they left, and how they got out when other people didn't get out. What what did they think caused the Holocaust, that kind of thing. And one of the people I interviewed, I won't give you her name, but she's president of a major university in this country. She's a very significant person. Her father was German, and they came, so she was raised here a little bit during the war. She went back afterwards, and she stayed with Weber's sister. Now, for somebody like me, Weber's a rock star, so my ears perked up, and I said, "What did she say about Hitler?" And she said, "It was very interesting. Their attitude was he was such a fool that people of good taste simply wouldn't discuss him." And that was my attitude. I didn't take Trump seriously. I just thought, and that was a big mistake in the 30s with Hitler. It's a big mistake to do now with Trump. And if we do as Hillary Clinton did and write these people, the MAGA people, off as a basket of deplorables, we're in big trouble, because they're not deplorable. They are human beings. They have rights. They have you have to try to understand what it is that's driving them. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to do the book, was to try to spend time with Republicans and understand the nuance that was going on, and that most Republicans are not, well, not all Republicans are people that like Trump. In fact, I think a lot of them do not like him, but they like his policies, and they feel that he's a Republican. They have to support him. But I think we do ourselves a disservice if we write off the MAGA people as just totally crazy. I think some of them are. They're very paranoid, but I think they're responding to a feeling of grievance, a feeling they've been passed over. And this is where I think some of the political correctness comes in, the feeling that they've lost their country, that they have to, everybody has to have, unisex bathrooms, things of that kind. And so I think there's some excesses that probably the liberal progressives did, including me, that probably have alienated some people and made them feel that they're not valued and that other people are valued more. So I think that's what you're getting when you get this kind of homophobia and the kind of anti-transgender stuff. I mean, there's a lot of talk in the Republicans about transgender, and it just isn't that big a phenomenon in the country, really. There aren't that many people,
No,
maybe 1 or 2% that are transgender
it's
people.
about 0.6% of the
Yes,
population.
yeah, that's right.
More if you count like the non-binary or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah,
I mean,
but yeah.
I think I might disagree. I think that there's a few different things you touched on, some
Mhm.
of which I would align with. I mean, I think so. There's one issue, which is how seriously do we take Trump, and how alarmed should we be by this? On which I'm very much of the camp. We should take him seriously, and we should be alarmed. I think there are scenarios that are not completely unlikely that are very dark indeed. Um,
Mhm.
I think when it comes to Trump's supporters, I think we can often conflate understanding with sympathy. I think we should aim to understand where people
Right,
are coming from.
absolutely. Right.
But I think when people ask me and they say, I just don't understand how people can still be voting for them. There's an answer about values, about abortion, about media ecospheres,
Mhm.
about all the things we've just talked about. But I
Mhm.
feel like when people ask me that, they're not asking me that. They're asking me, can I hold these people as morally blameworthy? Never mind what they're, the overarching meta analysis. I think they're doing something wrong in continuing to support Trump. I think that's the undertone of that. And I think where I've landed is Trump needs to be taken seriously. We certainly can't be complacent. We should aim to understand where Trump supporters are coming from. But I think at some point now we're past just voting for a conservative party.
Right.
People are doing something dangerous in
Absolutely. Yeah.
continuing to support this. And I think when you have a candidate talking about deporting 20 million people, I think we are now at a point where we can say, yeah, you might be like a good father and a good husband, but you can be a good father and a good husband and still go out and do bad things in the world. And I think it is time to start thinking and holding people as morally blameworthy for continuing to be a part of that movement. I don't think that's
Oh, yeah.
exclusive with
Yeah.
understanding them. But like
Yeah,
in a
no.
sense, it wasn't good politics, but I understand what Hillary meant with the basket of deplorables thing. There are a lot of racists and so on in the country, and they are flocking under one banner. It's not politic to say it, but yeah, I think that there is a moral failing in large swaths of the electorate, and it's uncomfortable to say, but I think that's true.
Well, I agree with you in so far as I think, yes, I think these people who are supporting Trump are doing a lot of harm, and I think there is a extent to which you do have to say there's unethical behavior which they're advocating, and it's being done in their name. Um, as I read the 2025 project, it scares the dickens out of me.
Hmm.
This is taking us way, way, way back. You know, this is not something that you want to do in politics. It's politics of revenge, politics of anger, politics of hurting other people. It's going to be chaos if he does it. I mean, just looking at, getting rid of 30% of the people in the federal government, you can't do that. You don't want people who are strong party supporters making decisions about Food and Drug Administration, our nuclear weapons, our climate policy. So I think yes, there's heavy moral overtones to this, and I think that much of what Trump is advocating is immoral and is simply wrong. And I think the lying that he does, that he has no respect for, it isn't that I don't think he even recognizes the difference between truth and lie anymore. I think he just says whatever he wants to do. There's a book that was just reviewed in the New York Times. I haven't had a chance to read it, but the article was the the buck stops elsewhere. And I think that's always Trump's attitude. Even when he was a kid, they traced back to his early childhood and some of the things he did, which were just nasty and mean, and trying to prove that he could, make other people uncomfortable. And that's immoral. You have to call out that kind of behavior. So I have no problem at all saying that, Trump is a sadistic sociopath. He's not just a malignant narcissist. And there's a wonderful movie, a film called Unfit, which is done by a bunch of psychiatrists who said that we have a moral obligation to warn our patients if there's someone that's going to do harm to them. And Trump is going to do harm to the country. And it's worth watching from a psychological point of view. They're very serious psychoanalysts, and they said we have massive amounts of data on Trump, more than we have with most patients probably. So I think he is. Now, are the people that he is supporting him? I think the MAGA movement is so big, it's hard to characterize it. But certainly, I think some of the people, what they're doing, what they're advocating is wrong. And simply from a moral point of view, you're absolutely right. It was not wonderful, loving people. I mean, just characterize January 6th as a moment, day of love, which is what Trump has done. It's like another planet. I spent 2018 in the American Academy in Berlin, and I I hadn't been watching a lot of American news. And I said during the Trump period that there were so many things I felt my mouth was just, what? What did he do? And I got on the plane and I picked up the newspaper, and it was Melania had gone out to see my immigrant children. And she had a jacket that says, "I really don't care, do you?" And it was like, what?
Yeah.
He sort of leaves me. It's a continual stretching of the boundaries of what is acceptable behavior. And that, I think, is one of the worst things that he has done, is he has coarsened the political discourse and led us into a situation where he doesn't actually criticize anything that Kamala Harris does. He just says she's a horrible person. She lies. She's stupid. She's not even as good looking as I am. This is not the Lincoln Douglas debates. This is not what you want for political discourse. You should be debating policy issues. You should be having intelligence. And that's not what Trump has done. And I think to his eternal shame, the American public has let him do this. And this is why I think people like McConnell are very guilty of letting this go by. It's complicit in a situation like this. You have to stand up and say something. This is why I called the subtitle of the book is Moral Courage in the Republican Party. I sent it to one of my sons who's wanted to be a writer, did science fiction fantasy, and he wrote back and said, "I guess I'm not the only person in the family who writes science fiction fantasy, Mom." And I thought, well, there is a little moral courage in the Republican Party, but we certainly need a lot more of it. It's very important to stand up and do the right thing. And I don't think people have done that in the Republican Party, and I think we all are going to pay for it. If he wins, I think we're on a very dark course in American history. It's going to be very, very unfortunate, and I think he's going to do serious harm to some of the basic institutional structures, and that's not something you want to happen.
No, indeed.
Yeah, so.
Let's end it on that optimistic or lack of optimistic note. Before you go, do you want to remind listeners of the book and where they should go to get it, and anything else you'd like to call their attention to, a website, any other work of yours, anything like that?
Well, yeah, I have a website. If you just type in Kristen R. Monroe, the University of California, Irvine, you'll get all kinds of information. But I have the other the book that we talked about is the one about Trump and the Republicans to support him. And I'm sending off When Conscience Calls, which is a University of Chicago Press book, came out in 2023. And that's for if the election goes badly, however you feel it goes badly, it's what people do in terms of showing moral courage in times of confusion and despair. So that may be a relevant book for people to look at after that. But yeah. So thank you very much. It was nice to be on your program. You asked good questions, which is good.
Thank you so much. Thank you for making the time. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.